Morning, everybody. This is Steve Sabludowski, publisher of BuyUBuzz.com. And this morning we have Rob Maness, who is our Friday morning advisor, and we're going to be talking Louisiana legislative session. Good morning, Colonel Maness. How you doing?
Hey, good morning, Steve. I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Sorry for the delay. I had a camera problem. And so these things happen. The latest technology, you always going to have some kind of issue. So it looks like the Baton Rouge legislature up in Baton Rouge is having a few issues themselves. So
Yeah.
what the heck is going on?
Well, I think what you're seeing is the typical, what we call the same old in the world I come from in the military. The Republican leadership in the House sounds like they thought they had a plan and an agreement with the governor and part of the Democrats, which is a very powerful faction in the Louisiana House, the Black Legislative Caucus. They were all on the same page with the governor, and that was the beginning of what a lot of folks are calling a debacle right now. We're now into Friday of the special session, and there still has been no agreement on how to move forward, whether to raise revenue and how, or to try to cut the budget
Right,
to meet
right.
that fiscal cliff.
Sure, absolutely. So the people that you've been talking to and your observations, I mean, do you think that there's enough motivation at this point in time to strike a deal, some kind of deal? And today is supposed to be the drop dead day.
Today is a drop dead day. I can tell you from what I saw last night coming out of the governor's office, they still appear to be optimistic. I mean, he's been pretty frank in previous sessions when he was not hopeful. So the indicator there that there may be a deal coming. Unfortunately for the Republicans, those of us that vote them in, we don't want to see tax increases. We want to see a really hard look at the state's budget and find every ounce of waste, and then let's make decisions on what we probably shouldn't be funding now versus increasing in revenues, because the voters that vote the Republicans in, by and large, don't believe that there is a revenue problem, that the state has a spending problem.
Let me throw some out to you. I did an interview yesterday, and it was with Senator Conrad Apple, or Pell rather,
Mm-hmm.
and he's actually my senator, state senator, and what he said was, I mean, he said a lot, quite frankly, that I'm gonna reference, but one of the things he said was that there's just a limit in terms of what we can cut. That's just in general terms. I wish I had the actual phrase in front of me. But obviously, we need to cut, and we need not to raise income taxes or do anything that's going to discourage business. But there seems to be, at least in the legislature, there seems to be some kind of understanding that you just can't pare it all back. At the same time, to be fair to him, what he's saying is, look, we didn't need this legislative session at all. He said, people don't, basically we could have waited until the end of the regular session in June, or we could have gone ahead and suspended the regular session, hold a special session, and then once we finish that, then just reopen the general session. So he's saying that basically it's a these are my terms, a PR stunt.
Well, he's got a point. The revenue that is being discussed and debated right now really is not going to be known until after the regular session starts. So I agree with him that the special session should have occurred this summer after the regular session, probably right at the very end, so they could get it all done at once. so that we knew what the revenue stream actually looked like. And I agree. I tend to agree with Senator Pell, which isn't always the case. But in this case, I think he's spot on. This was really a waste of time. I think that's what you're seeing. There really wasn't a solid plan good enough to get through the session with an agreement between the different factions in each of the parties to whether to raise revenue in the short term or the long term using income taxes like the Legislative Black Caucus wants to do. And we've taken a look at those ideas, and it appears to us that that's just a return to the Stelly plan tax brackets that were voted out by the voters overwhelmingly several years ago. So their plan's not going to sell well with, I don't think, with their voters or the Republican voters, quite frankly. And of course, the sales tax, keeping a quarter of the sales tax, absolutely doesn't sell well with the voters on the Republican side and the conservative independents in the state of Louisiana. They feel betrayed because the legislators said it was temporary and that they would fix the problem both on the budget and the revenue side by the time that they came back up on this. And here we are coming up on the summer of 2018, and that sales tax, that 1 penny sales tax, is going to expire, and they're trying to save a quarter of it. So that most people that I talk to on the ground feel like they've been betrayed if they pass that, and I think that's why it failed overwhelmingly the other night.
Interesting. In terms of Stelly, let me just play devil's advocate here. Yeah, Stelly was overturned, but things were different. We had the anticipation and actually receipt of a tremendous amount of money coming in from the federal government. We don't have that. We don't have that stream, that's coming in because of Hurricane Katrina. So the argument would be that things are different. I mean, things do change. And so we need to, in fairness to those people who are, say, poor, it's unfair to put all the burden on them. I guess I'm trying to articulate what the other side would be.
I assume you mean through the sales tax, because the sales tax is regressive, and I think you're right. I mean, I oppose keeping the high sales tax the way it is. As long as we have a combination of income tax and sales tax, that is a regressive tax structure on the poor. There are other ways, as we've discussed before, that we could restructure the tax system in the state of Louisiana, but it's going to have to be a holistic approach and be sold to the voters on both sides that it's the right thing to do. I would say that I think the budget's increased dramatically since those days too, and we really are spending a lot more money than we were in the days of Stelly and when we had those federal funds coming in. And those federal funds help balloon the budget up. So, let's take a realistic look at what we're spending and why, and are they all the right expenditures? Let's take a look at those dedicated funds. Getting back to Senator Appel, I think he was talking about the constitutionally dedicated funds and legislatively dedicated monies too. There are many of those now, even more than there were when Governor Romer made a big effort to reduce those. I don't think that budgeting by constitution is the most effective way to go. I've outwardly spoken several times over the last few years since I came into the panel. Take a really hard look at that. I think Senator Sharon Hewitt and was working with folks in the House of Representatives to take a hard look at that. They've had several committee meetings over the last 6 months to really look at those dedicated funds and see if they can come up with an approach that would be acceptable to everybody. And obviously you can't eliminate them all. Some of them were put there for very good reasons. They're not all bad, I'm sure. But we have so many of them now, it's easy for folks like Senator Appel to say, look, our hands are tied. And not that that's disparaging on him, but he's just saying the facts. So we've got to get our arms around that too, and that just is another reason why I agree with Senator Appel that we shouldn't have had this special session now, because we didn't have our ducks lined up to really take an approach on what are we going to do with revenue, what do we need to do, and how do we approach this dedicated funding issue, because we've taken the power to legislate from our legislators, and we end up with a very centralized government with the executive branch in almost total control of it. And where do we end up? It's Friday of a special session, the latest one that we've seen. What is this, number 6 or number 5? I've lost count.
6. I think it's
6. And we continue to see the only solutions that we see are short term, which is bad for the state. We all know that our credit rating is at risk if we go with short-term revenue raising. We all know that our sales tax is the highest state in the United States at this point, and we're surrounded by states that don't have state income tax, that have a different tax structure system, and we still have a higher sales tax even with our income tax system too. So we've got to really take a hard look at those systems holistically and come up with a plan to be able to raise money and budget within our means. Now, if our revenue increases because the economy takes off and we get more businesses in, then the executive branch and the legislature can take a look and reassess down the road. But for the time being, we've got to get this under control, or we'll continue to slide down this hill.
Okay, now we have some comments, and I'm going to read them. First of all, people watching from Destrehan. Let's see. Beth Croslow Billings, how much is this PR stunt costing Louisiana? And then George Peterson responded, and he says, and it was very good seeing George yesterday at Politics with a Punch. We had a great crowd, by the way. Didn't have a chance to really talk to him, but what he said was every one of Edwards' special session costs the taxpayer $800,000. This is the 5th. You're right, George. This is the 5th special session for a whopping grand total of $4 million to the taxpayers just for special sessions for Edwards to keep his tax and spend agenda. I would argue that the first 4 were because when Edwards took over, we're looking at a $3 billion shortfall that basically occurred under Governor Jindal, and that was to some extent due to the oil drop in prices, and so we're making up for that. And so when you have the end of the quick fix, which is the sales tax, you're back at the same place. Now, obviously, like you're saying, that we do have increased spending. I think much of that is coming from the Medicaid expansion. You can argue whether or not that is effective, and I don't think the numbers are there yet. But I don't know exactly what can be cut. I mean, we all are talking about cutting waste. Again, Senator Appel said that there's just a limit of what you can cut. So, I don't know whether or not it's been fully articulated to us what we can cut. I mean, certainly we can. I think Jeff Carrera made a really good point. I think 2 weeks ago when I was on his show every Tuesday morning on WGSO, and he says, "Why don't we pare back TOPS program to the extent that if you don't have, say, I'm going to say 3.0 or 2.5 average, then you lose the right to TOPS."
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's a lot that I've just said. Number one, I'm saying I'm not sure what we can cut. I'm saying Jeff, did throw out an idea that I think makes some good sense in terms of reducing the eligibility TOPS, but still making it available, increasing the incentives. I'm saying that I wouldn't blame Edwards for the whole thing because we did have the issue with Governor Jindal and an oral issue. We had the termination of the end of this penny sales tax. So I think there's just a lot of blame and a lot of ideas to go around, a lot of places. And lastly, like I said, Senator Pell, who's pretty staunch conservative, said, "Look, there's just so much that we can cut." But I don't know what benefit the Medicaid expansion in terms of benefit to the health system we have achieved for the cost that we're spending, which is actually going to be reduced in terms of the money that we've received from the federal government. So anyway, go ahead and unpack all that, please.
Well, starting with the Medicaid expansion, Steve, I mean, that's why I and even Governor Jindal opposed Medicaid expansion. One of the main reason I opposed it was because the federal monies run out. And the federal dollars are a large part of our budget, too. When you're talking about the $29 billion budget number or $30 billion budget number, I'm not sure where it's at today, but it's somewhere between $28 and $30 billion, I believe. When you're talking about that number, large portions of that come from the federal government through the Medicaid expansion. I'm not so sure that it was the right thing for our state because our economy was down due to oil prices at the time. I understood the reasoning behind it, although I disagreed with it vehemently. But I understand where the governor was coming from. We have a large poverty population in this state. Almost 50% of children in New Orleans live in poverty. So we've got to make sure that those folks can be taken care of and those kinds of things. But doing the expansion has probably put us in a predicament that we're not real sure because, as you said, the numbers aren't all there yet. So we're trying to come up with fixes for our budget and our tax and spending systems, but we really don't know where we're at when it comes to really large parts of our budget, like the Medicaid expansion. I do think it was a good idea to try to put work requirements on able-bodied people that are under Medicaid, but really the bill that was passed out of the House was gutted, so there's really no impact on that. And quite frankly, I'd be interested to know what the numbers are, real numbers are, of the able-bodied people that are already on Medicaid and how many of them don't work. And nobody's really shown me those numbers yet. I could have missed it in the media coverage and the discussion and everything, but I've never seen those numbers. Although it's not a bad idea to have work requirements on programs that are designed to get people out of poverty and back on their feet. We've got to do it from a good data perspective. And make sure that we understand what the impacts are. Make sure that those that are in need of a helping hand aren't left out because of them, and make sure that that they're having the impact that we are desiring to have without it costing us so much money.
Okay, so
that's my view on the Medicaid issue.
Oh, sure, yes, and as you said, we don't know exactly what the numbers are. And so it is difficult. Kathy Perilou says, I still don't get why Louisiana elected Edwards. And Beth Croslow Billings says, George, Jay Darden is benefiting from political payback for throwing Louisiana under the bus by endorsing Edwards in 2015. That's why. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues there. I mean, people want to, people who are responding here want cuts. So what should we cut? I mean, the first question, the most eligible question, quite frankly, the place that is the biggest target would be TOPS. George Peterson said that, hey, we didn't have TOPS when I went to school, went to college. but a lot of people really like tops. So that's, in terms of the most identifiable, other than, say, Medicaid expansion, the most identifiable target is going to be tops.
Well, here's the secret about tops that nobody really wants to talk about, is that people love it. The middle class loves it in this state. It doesn't matter, and it crosses party lines and those kind of things. And it's going to be very difficult to change that system. I think it should continue to be a merit-based system. You can't have failing grades and still get tops, obviously. Are there tweaks you could make? Probably, but they're going to be marginal. So that's the big hill that has to be climbed if you're going to try to make any significant cuts to that program, is that the middle class loves that program. And believe me, I've talked to folks on the left, right, and center in this state, all around the state for several years now. And I can't find very many people that want to go and just slash that program to bits, because they know it's helping them. It's helping the kids of the state of Louisiana become competitive with the graduates from other states. And we have one of some of the best schools in the country still. In spite of all of our challenges, we still have some great programs, and our kids are graduating from them, and they do tend to get great jobs, although I'd like to see more of them stay here. So I'm cheering on the oil and gas situation and hoping that continues to grow and get stronger every day, and that we open more markets overseas for liquefied natural gas and our oil, and get those prices stabilized at the right place, so that our folks are able to hire more people, pay better wages, and encourage our kids to stay here that graduate from our school system. So that's the dirty little secret on tops, is everybody loves it. Personally, I have never taken an opportunity to use the program. I haven't had a need to, but the folks that I talk to, which are almost all middle class or approaching the poverty line or even below the poverty line, are adamant about keeping that program where it is. Now, the other thing about expenditures in this state is we give a lot of money away. And as you know, Steve, I'm an adamant opponent of crony capitalism, is a term that we use in the conservative community. I think we have an opportunity now, and I'm going to broach a subject here. It's very emotional, but around the Second Amendment. The example is the company of Delta was going to get a $50 million payout from the state of Georgia. That was removed, so that expenditure is not going to be made because Delta has gone against the Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. And we live in a state that is also as strongly supportive of the Second Amendment as we all should be as Americans, in my opinion. But we live in a state that is probably stronger in support of that. And this is a good opportunity. And I've said it publicly on Twitter the other day to the governor and the legislators that they ought to look at companies that may be getting payouts from us and make sure that if they're on the list of people that are boycotting the NRA, and I'm part of the NRA, I've been a life member for some time now, and that's what the NRA is made of, is just regular old citizens that believe in the Constitution of the United States. The governor and the legislature should be looking at those companies that are boycotting us and take it's a good opportunity to look at it and cut those payouts if they're getting any. Now, the problem is you can't even hardly find a list of the payouts the state of Louisiana is making, because we aren't transparent enough yet, and we need to do that too.
Okay, getting back to the conversation, see if I might. Again, George Peterson, a lot of people like food stamps, but not everybody gets free food. Neil Wood, and I think it was also, it was somebody else, I'm sorry. Neil Wood says much of it comes down to corruption, 14,000 contracts. That's a really interesting topic, because many of the contracts are healthcare related, and that's due to the privatization, which actually started under Governor Jindal.
That's true. And it's my understanding that privatization is actually costing the state much, much more than the charity hospital system was. Is that an accurate statement? I saw a media piece on that just late last night. I haven't had time to do any research on it, but I'll ask you, Steve. You've been looking at this for quite some time now. Is that an accurate statement that we're actually paying in the multitudes of several tens of millions more than we were for the charity hospital system?
I actually don't know. I have to look at whatever that you were looking at last night. I didn't see it. I'll say this. I'm in favor of privatization as much as possible for as many services as possible. The problem is that you do get into that, as you point out, the crony capitalism. When you do contract government services because there is not enough transparency in government on the state, the local, or the federal government perspective. So, it's really kind of a difficult thing. So I don't know the answer to that. I'll try to find it and put it up on Bayou Buzz, but I don't know the answer. The NRA thing, I wonder if there's going to be some, because I'm going to try to keep this to Louisiana legislature issues. But I was going to bring up NRA and that issue. And I understand what you're saying about Delta. What was your take in terms of what the president said to basically the country a couple of days ago? Now, I think he's kind of walked that back this morning. I believe that I saw something on the TV news indicated that he may have walked back what he was trying to do the other day when he had that televised conference. So your feelings about the president's position?
I think the president's position that he stated in his televised meeting the other day is untenable. I don't think that that's going to float with his supporters. Whether and that he crosses party lines. So because those supporters believe in this thing called the Constitution of the United States, and the Second Amendment is a civil right to us. And when you start saying we're going to forget the due process, go get the guns, making comments like that, even the ACLU should be up in arms about that kind of statement coming from the chief law enforcement officer in the land, the president of the United States, because I know a lot of people don't believe that, but he is the chief law enforcement officer in the land. He owns it, and we can't have the executive branch violating due process out there willy-nilly just because somebody made a phone call. I mean, things still have to be looked at. Now, having said that, there have been some great failures on the Broward Sheriff's Office, the FBI, that could have prevented, I'm convinced, prevented that shooting down in Parkland, Florida. In this particular case, they missed so many things from what we're finding out that I can confidently say that shooting would have been stopped had they taken the right actions and done that. And that really concerns me, Steve, especially with the FBI and the Sheriff's Office communication in the field. FBI office is communicating with the intelligence system at the federal level, because post 9/11, we were supposed to have fixed all that. We all got together and we agreed that we would restrict our Fourth Amendment rights and allow some surveillance on American citizens and those kind of things. And I'm sure you're aware I'm opposed to the Patriot Act. I think it should be repealed. It may have been necessary for a time, but it should be repealed now. So we've done those things, but these are the same types of failures that happened pre 9/11 that resulted in us being surprised on 9/11 in 2001. And that should cause everybody grave concern. And unfortunately, we've got the political types on both sides focusing on guns and something called a bump stock that I never even heard of. And I've shot a lot of guns. I'm an owner of 2 AR-15s and a hunting rifle. And, and I grew up around guns all of my life. And a bump stock is something that your average shooter has never even heard of. But we're going to ban it and say you can't get it. And we're not even sure, and it's not even been proven that the guy actually used the weapon that had the bump stock on it in the Las Vegas shooting. So we're going to go do all these things when we really ought to be focused on the failures in the law enforcement system and securing these schools. Those are the two things. Now, I've done school security before. My last job in the Air Force, I commanded a very large base. I had a public elementary school on my base. I was responsible for its security. We, in our law enforcement unit of about 600 folks, we did our active shooter drills with the teachers and administrators on the weekends. We were one of the first groups in the country to do it. And we've seen that it doesn't matter what type of weapon a person has. We even tested it with a revolver, a 38 caliber snub-nosed revolver. An individual that's motivated could kill 7 people before you can get somebody inside the school, even with your security force and your law enforcement force less than 120 seconds away. That's 2 minutes away. That shooter could still kill 7 people with a 6-shooter revolver. So that means he went through one cylinder and reloaded before you could get somebody there to put the guy out and take him out. So having armed security in the schools, I think, is very important. We've got to come up with a security system that will work. And that's a state issue. That is a state issue. And we shouldn't focus on gun control. We don't need to focus on banning something. There's several 100 million AR-15s out there. It's the most popular firearm in the United States today. Sales are increasing dramatically. There are lines outside of some of these big box stores that are still selling them. NRA memberships are increasing dramatically because the American people don't believe in that. But what they will believe in, and what you can get both sides together on, is fixing that law enforcement system, doing a really solid investigation on that, and find out where the breakdowns were and fill those breakdown gaps, and securing these schools so that this can't happen again.
What about background checks?
Well, you know what? There's a background check bill to help improve that system in the House of Representatives. I think it's been passed by the House. It's been sitting in the Senate for some time now. They still haven't taken any action on it. I think most American people, look, I bought 3 firearms from gun shows in the last 3 years. I've had a background check on each one of them. Matter of fact, I bought 2 firearms at one time from a gun show here in New Orleans last year, and I had to have a background check for each firearm, not just one for the purchase of both of them. So background checks, they may be great, but are they working? Look, the guy that shot up the church in Charlotte, people got focused on race when really the focus should have been on the failure to keep him from being able to buy a firearm when he was in the system, and should have been stopped on the NIC check. So we've got some work to do on that. I get concerned, though, when I hear things like, we've got to make sure the people with mental health problems can't get guns. Well, have you ever looked at the DSM, the document that lays out mental health diagnosis? There's hundreds, if not 1,000, different conditions that Americans have in the mental health side, and it's a range of things. So we've got to be very careful how we approach that when we're talking about taking somebody's civil right away of being able to own an arm. I said arms specifically because it doesn't have to be a firearm. Arms are more than just firearms. Unless they were going to be a danger to themselves and others. Now, if it's gone through due process and they're properly adjudicated, I don't think you'll have any arguments there. But we've got to make sure our systems that we have now are working, and they're not. And that's where the failures were.
One of the discussions I had with George Peterson a couple of years ago dealt with arms, and I threw out the question whether or not, say, a hand grenade or a bazooka would constitute an arm under the Constitution.
Well, they do constitute arms under the Constitution. Yeah, contrary to popular belief, they're not banned, but you do have to meet the licensing requirements. All regulation is not bad, but what the difference between owning an arm is, and say getting a driver's license is you don't have a civil right to be able to drive a car. You have a civil right to be able to own firearms. There are reasons for it that it was put in the Constitution of the United States. Those reasons still exist today to be able to protect your life and your family's life, to secure your home and your property without having to rely on the government. As you can see with these responses and breakdowns in government systems, the government's not so effective either. Heck, for a person like me who's worked in government for over 30 years of his life, we know that. We know government doesn't work very effectively. The reason why our defense budget is so big is it takes a lot of resources to be able to do things right in the Defense Department, because it's so hard to get government bureaucracies to do things right. It takes so many resources to do that. And a lot of folks don't understand that.
You know, as you mentioned, the hardening of the schools would be a state issue. And the states would say, hey, you know, we're overburdened, as you know. And, you know, wouldn't it be sort of an inconsistency to impose a cost like that on the state, you know, when you're looking for small government?
Well, I think that's why it's key that you can't just throw everything the president said in his meeting with the governors the other day and in the televised meeting that occurred, because he talked about federal grants and getting resources down to the state level to help them figure out what they needed. The other thing is, though, it doesn't take a lot of money to allow people to be able to concealed carry inside of school. It doesn't take a lot of money to do that. Matter of fact, it'd probably take a few minutes just ripping those silly decals that say gun-free zone off of the windows and repealing those laws. You know, I'm a believer that teachers that are qualified to concealed carry should be able to do that if they desire to do that. I'm a believer that citizens like me who go into public school shouldn't have to remove my firearm if I'm concealed carrying. I've been through much deeper background checks because I'm a concealed carry permit holder than anybody that buys a gun just walking into a gun store off the street. And everybody that has that permit, especially in Louisiana, the Louisiana system, I've seen firsthand. And it's a very deep background check, including mental health issues and those kind of things. So we have that we could do. But we also have heard from the president that he certainly wants to look at how do we get the financial resources to the states so they can come up with the plans that suit their situations and help them get that done.
So what if a state says that they want to ban the AR-15?
Well, that's going to get fought in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would overturn that. If you read the Heller decision that was made a few years ago in the District of Columbia situation, the key to whether a firearm can be banned or not is just in common use at the time. And the most commonly used firearm today is in the United States is the AR-15. So the state would unfortunately be taking a lot of expenditures of resources on board if they chose to do that. And I wouldn't advise them to try to do that. I know that there's a bill to try to do that by a Democrat that's being pushed right now. There's been media reports on it already. I think it's Representative Terry Landry, who I respect his experiences very much. But I don't agree that that is an approach that's going to be effective. And what we need right now is effectiveness, because without effectiveness, any ban that's not effective isn't going to have any impact. Let's focus on things that will work. And he knows, Representative Landry knows, the only way to stop an active shooter, whether it's in a school or not, is to confront him with armed force as quick as possible.
We have a couple more minutes. Do you have any feel for what type of legislation that you think ought to be passed? We have a general session coming up, I think 8 days after the end of the special session. So that's obviously where a lot of the legislation, deal with these kind of issues will come up. So,
Yeah.
do you have any recommendations in terms of what you would like to see to protect the Second Amendment?
Yeah, I'd like to see a repeal of the gun-free zone laws. If there are laws in the state, I believe there are. I mean, I see gun-free zone signs all over the place. I think folks that have had background checks, that have a concealed carry permit, can carry firearms into these facilities, and that's schools. That includes government facilities and those kind of things too, because we have lots of gun-free zones that are targets. And if a proprietor of a private business is thinking about putting a gun-free zone sign up, somebody gets killed by a crook with a firearm in that facility, you can expect you're going to get a lawsuit from that person's family, because that's what I would do. That's what I would do, is file lawsuits against these folks if one of my family members got injured or lost their lives because they weren't able to have their own firearm for protection on them in a gun-free zone. So that's the first thing. Then if teachers want to carry firearms, or people want to carry firearms into a government facility or school in this case, I think we do have to have the right amount of regulation for that, because I don't believe you want open carry for anybody that's not a law enforcement officer in a facility like a school or a government facility. So we've got to take a look at that, because we're an open carry state, technically speaking, and I myself open carry quite often, but I don't do it in the places where I'm not supposed to, and I don't conceal carry in the places that I'm not supposed to. So I think we need to make sure we've got adequate regulation on that, so that teachers know what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to get that job done, and what type of training they're supposed to get, and those kind of things. So
there are two tweets I want to read. One is from Raju from CNN. Says Sarah Sanders this morning tells reporters Trump has not shifted on his stance on guns since Wednesday, despite NRA meeting, per one of the reporters of CNN. But it was unclear where he stood at that meeting. Sanders also says Trump conceptually backs assault weapon ban, but knows there isn't much support. So that's from this morning, and there was one other from this morning. This is from Abby Phillip. Sarah Huckabee Sanders told reporters this morning that the president called the NRA and arranged the Oval Office meeting yesterday. Plus, she says his views on gun policy hasn't changed, and the things he said Wednesday still stand. So that, I brought it up earlier that I thought there was some moving off of his position on Wednesday. Based upon what these tweets say, your take, and that's the last question I have for you.
Well, I think he may as well stand down his campaign for 2020 if he continues down the road that he was on in that meeting on Wednesday. The folks that I talked to are adamantly opposed to raising the age to 21 to be able to purchase a firearm, a rifle, or a shotgun. As I am, look, you're talking to a guy that joined the military when he was 17 years old. If you're old enough to serve in the military or be drafted, you're old enough to make the decisions, and you're going to be armed in the military, even if you're 17, which I was, and as are thousands of people in this country every year, and they are responsible for their actions. And that's what we have to do, is hold people responsible for their actions so that we don't restrict law-abiding citizens from their civil right of being able to own a firearm and protect themselves, and do the right thing by their community and their country, if necessary. So I think he ought to just stand down his campaign for 2020 if he's going to continue down that road and be a one-term president. And it wouldn't surprise me, though, that if that this approach could actually open him up to actual impeachment. You know that there are a lot of Democrats that want to impeach the president, but if the folks that believe in the Constitution of the United States, there are enough of them to align with those folks that want to impeach this president, he could be facing impeachment very, very easily, and he might not even be a one-term president if he goes down this road. That's how critical it is, and how not strong the gun lobby is, but how strongly supported they are by the citizens of the United States. I think a lot of people don't realize that. They miss that. They think the gun lobby is about big corporations, but it's not. It's the NRA is supported by citizens more than it is anything else, and that's the only thing that really gives them their power.
So I said it was the last question, but you brought something up I need to follow up on, and that is that, and preface it by saying that you're a very strong, staunch supporter of the president. You may have issues with some of the things he says and does, but you definitely are a very, very strong supporter of the president. So now you're talking about if he moves away from the Second Amendment, there is impeachment. I mean, that's from my standpoint, it's really profound that anybody would say that.
It's profound that I would say that. I mean, you point that out. Now, look, I don't personally even like this individual as a human being. I've said that many times, but his policies so far, I think, are the right ones for the country up to this point. But what's not right for the country is to ignore the Constitution of the United States and try to act like something is not a civil right when it is. And that's been a problem on the left before. And Mr. Trump's not a left or a right person. He's not an ideologue. I've said that many times. I think you know that, Steve. He is just a person.
Opportunist is the way
I don't know if he's an opportunist. Well, we know he's an opportunist. He's a pitchman. So I don't know if he's speaking on emotion right now. Look, I'm upset that 17 kids died. I'm very upset, but I'm focused on policies that I know from decades of experience that can have an effect to either stop or prevent or keep so many people from getting killed in these types of activities. Because I don't think there's anything you can do to get the rate down to zero. But there are definitely things that could have been done, even in the response at Parkland, that could have reduced the killings of these children. So I'm very upset about it. I still have a child that's in 7th grade, and all of my kids went to public schools. So, but if the president steps away from the Second Amendment, it will be worse than if he stepped away from nominating a guy like Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. He needs to understand that when he takes that action.
Wow. Very, very interesting for sure. So, Rob Maness, we've come to the end of the show, and those people watching currently, or those people who are going to watch later on, I want to remind everybody that we're going to be visiting with Rob Maness every Friday morning, hopefully as close to 8 o'clock hour, as 8 o'clock a.m. as possible. So if you are watching, please share. Please like, please share. If you're not watching, shame on you. But really interesting discussion. So I'm going to push some buttons. Please stay on the line, Rob, and